The medical bay smelled like antiseptic and recycled air. Captain Vexel of the Crathan Imperial Fleet stood motionless as the human medic approached him, her boots making soft squeaking sounds against the sterile floor. She was small, even by human standards, with dark hair pulled back into a messy ponytail and eyes that seemed too bright for someone working the night shift on a military station. "Good evening, Captain," she said with that peculiar human smile, showing teeth in what they insisted was a friendly gesture. Most species found it unsettling. Vexel had served with humans long enough to know better, but something about this particular human's smile made his scales itch. "Medic Hayes," he acknowledged, his translator rendering his clicking speech into flat, emotionless human standard. "I require treatment for the plasma burns on my secondary arms." She nodded enthusiastically, already pulling out her medical scanner. "Of course. Let me just take a look. Oh wow, these are pretty serious. You should have come in right after the battle. That was what, 6 hours ago?" 7.3 hours, Vexel corrected. He watched as she fussed over his injuries with practiced efficiency, her hands gentle despite the species difference. Hayes was always like this, chattering away about nothing important while she worked. The other medics on the station were professional and quiet. Hayes talked about the cafeteria food, about some entertainment program she watched, about the small plant she kept in her quarters. She was, in the opinion of most personnel on Orbital Station 7, odd. "You know," Hayes said, applying some kind of human gel to his burns that immediately soothed the pain, "you really shouldn't wait so long. Pain is your body's way of saying something's wrong, even for tough guys like you Crathans." Vexel's inner eyelids flickered with amusement. Tough. The Crathans were one of the dominant military species in the Galactic Alliance. They had conquered 17 systems before joining the Federation. Tough was an understatement. Yet Hayes said it like she was talking about a stubborn child refusing to eat vegetables. "I had duties to attend to," he replied simply. "Duties, schmooties," Hayes muttered, and Vexel had no idea what that meant. His translator offered no help. "There, all patched up. Try to avoid getting plasma burns for at least a week, okay? Give your scales time to regenerate properly." She smiled again, that warm expression that never quite reached the level of intensity he'd seen in other humans. Hayes smiled the way civilians smiled, the way shopkeepers and teachers smiled, not the way soldiers smiled. It was deeply strange because Medic Elena Hayes had been stationed on Orbital 7 for 3 standard years. She had treated casualties from dozens of engagements. She had worked through ship breaches, pathogen outbreaks, and once had continued surgery during a hull rupture while wearing an emergency vac suit. Her record was impeccable. She was also completely unable to maintain military bearing outside of actual emergencies. As Vexil left the medical bay, he passed Lieutenant Thorne, one of the human tactical officers. Thorne was everything a military human should be, precise, disciplined, with that dangerous edge that made humans such valuable allies. Thorne nodded respectfully as they passed. "Captain, how's Hayes treating you?" "Adequately," Vexil replied. Thorne's mouth twitched. "She's good at her job. Just don't ask her to march in formation or she'll trip over her own feet." This was apparently a joke. Vexil had learned to recognize human humor, though he rarely understood it. He clicked his mandibles in what he hoped was an appropriate response and continued to his quarters. The station hummed with activity around him. Orbital 7 was a forward operating base positioned at the edge of contested space. 3 species called it home temporarily: Crathans like himself, the insectoid Vrel, and humans. Each species brought their own character to the station. Crathans were disciplined and hierarchical. Vrel were efficient and focused. Humans were chaotic, emotional, and unpredictable. Hayes somehow managed to be all of those things and none of them simultaneously. Vexel's communicator chimed. Commander Zelix, the station's commanding officer and a fellow Crathan, appeared on the small screen. "Captain, we've received word. The enemy fleet has been spotted in the Talon Nebula. 3 heavy cruisers and support vessels. We're scrambling a response team." Vexil felt his combat glands activate, releasing the chemical cocktail that sharpened his senses. "I'll assemble my squadron immediately." "Good, medical staff is being briefed as well. We're sending Hayes with your unit." That made Vexil pause. "Hayes? Sir, wouldn't Medic Torvin be more appropriate? He has more combat experience." There was a long silence. Then Zelix said, "Watch the briefing files, Captain." Specifically File 773. Then tell me if you still want Torvin. The commander disconnected. Vexel stood in the corridor confused. File 773. He accessed his datapad and pulled up the military archives, entering the code. What he found made no sense. The file was heavily classified. It showed battle footage from the engagement 2 years ago, before Vexel had been assigned to Orbital 7. The enemy had ambushed a human medical transport, and the footage showed the aftermath. Bodies. So many bodies. And then he saw her, medic Elena Hayes, wearing torn and scorched combat armor, holding a weapon that was nearly as big as she was. Her face was covered in something dark. Blood, probably, but not her own. In the footage, she moved through the enemy positions like liquid death. Her movements were nothing like the clumsy, cheerful medic who had just treated his burns. This Hayes was precise, economical, terrifying. She killed 12 enemy combatants in 4 minutes. She saved 17 wounded soldiers. And then, when reinforcements arrived, she had smiled at them, that same gentle smile, and asked if anyone needed medical attention. Vexel watched the footage 3 more times. Each time he became more certain of one thing. The odd, smiling medic who talked about cafeteria food and houseplants was not what she appeared to be. She was a weapon that had learned to pretend it was something soft, and tomorrow they would be going into combat together. He found himself wondering which version of Hayes would board the transport, the one who smiled or the one who killed. The transport bay was organized chaos. Soldiers from 3 different species loaded equipment, checked weapons, and reviewed tactical data. Vexil's squadron consisted of 20 Krathen warriors, 8 Vrel shock troops, and 5 humans, including Hayes. She arrived last, carrying a medical pack that looked heavier than she was. Her uniform was regulation, but somehow she still managed to look slightly disheveled. A strand of hair had escaped her ponytail. Her boots weren't quite as polished as they should be. Sorry, she said, hurrying to the transport. Had to grab extra coagulant packs. You know how these things can go. Lieutenant Thorne, who was leading the human contingent, just shook his head. Hayes, one of these days you're going to be on time for something. I was on time for lunch yesterday, Hayes replied cheerfully. Being early for lunch doesn't count. Vexel observed this exchange with interest. The humans seemed comfortable with Hayes's lack of military precision. Thorne wasn't actually annoyed, just resigned. It was the way one might speak to a beloved but forgetful relative. The transport launched exactly on schedule. Inside, the soldiers settled into the uncomfortable reality of pre-combat waiting. Some checked their weapons repeatedly, others stared at nothing, mentally preparing. The Vrel entered a meditation state, their antennae lying flat against their heads. Hayes pulled out a small datapad and started reading something. Vexel's enhanced vision could make out the title, Comparative Xenobiology, Circulatory Systems Across Known Species. She was studying, before a combat mission, like a student preparing for an examination. Medic Hayes, Vexel said, moving to sit across from her. The transport seats were designed for multiple species, which meant they were uncomfortable for everyone. You have reviewed the tactical situation? She looked up, blinking those 2 bright eyes. Oh yes, Captain. 3 enemy cruisers, probable defensive positions in the asteroid field. We're going in to secure a forward observation post that got overrun. Standard search and rescue with probable heavy resistance. She recited the information perfectly, then went back to her datapad. Did you know that Vrel have 3 separate backup hearts? It's fascinating. Makes them really hard to kill with conventional weapons. One of the Vrel, a warrior named Chiktik, made a clicking sound that translated as laughter. This is true, small human. We are very difficult to kill. Which is good because I really hate losing patience, Hayes said with that smile again. The transport shuddered as it entered the nebula. The pilot's voice crackled over the intercom. Entering contested zone. Enemy contact expected in 15 minutes. Soldiers began their final preparations. Weapons were charged. Armor was sealed. Combat drugs were administered for those species that used them. The atmosphere grew tense, focused. Hayes put away her datapad and started organizing her medical supplies. She hummed something while she worked, a tune that Vexil's translator couldn't identify, just a simple melody completely at odds with their situation. You are not concerned? Vexil asked her directly. Hayes paused in her humming. About the mission? Of course I am. People might get hurt. That's always concerning. She secured a pack of synthetic blood to her belt, but worrying won't help them. Being prepared will. So I prepare. It was a logical answer. Almost too logical. I reviewed your service record, Vexel said carefully. The incident on the medical transport. 2 years ago. Something flickered across Hayes' face. Just for a moment her expression changed. The smile faded. Her eyes grew distant and cold like looking into deep space. Then it passed and she was cheerful Medic Hayes again. Oh, that. Yeah, that was a bad day. She went back to organizing her supplies. I don't really like thinking about it. You received a commendation. The Star of Valor. It is one of the highest military honors the Human Federation awards. They spelled my name wrong on the certificate, Hayes said, and her tone suggested the conversation was over. The transport suddenly lurched. Alarms blared. The pilot's voice was sharp now, clipped. Contact! Multiple bogies inbound. We're taking fire. Everything happened very fast. The transport's defensive weapons engaged with a sound like thunder compressed into metal. The ship twisted, evading, its inertial dampeners struggling to keep the passengers from being thrown around. Through the small viewport, Vexel could see enemy fighters streaking past, their weapons leaving bright trails in the dark. Brace for emergency landing, the pilot shouted. They hit something. The transport screamed, metal tearing. The world became a chaos of sound and violence and spinning. Vexel's combat instincts took over. He curled his secondary arms around his primary limbs, protecting his vulnerable joints. Around him, other soldiers did the same, each species responding according to their training. When the transport finally stopped moving, Vexel's audio receptors were ringing. Smoke filled the cabin. Emergency lights cast everything in red. He checked himself quickly. Bruised but functional. Around him, others were climbing to their feet. Sound off, Lieutenant Thorne barked. Who's hurt? Voices responded in multiple languages. The translator struggled to keep up. Out of 33 personnel, 5 were seriously wounded. 3 Krathens, 1 Vrel, 1 human. Where's Hayes? Someone called. Vexel looked around. The medic had been thrown to the far end of the cabin during the crash. She was pulling herself up using one of the safety rails. Blood ran down the side of her face from a cut above her eye. She wiped it away absently. I'm fine, she called back. But we need to move fast. The hull's compromised and I'm reading hostile life signs outside. She grabbed her medical pack and moved to the first wounded soldier with that same clumsy, hurried gait she always had. But her hands were steady as she worked. Perfectly steady. The rear hatch of the transport exploded inward. Enemy soldiers poured in. They were Zealoth, a reptilian species known for their aggression. 6 of them, armed with plasma weapons, moving in a tactical formation that spoke of professional military training. Everything slowed down for Vexel. His combat glands flooded his system with battle hormones. He raised his weapon knowing he was too slow. The Zealoth would fire first. The wounded would die. Hayes would die. Then Hayes moved. She didn't even look like the same being. One moment she was kneeling beside a wounded Krathen, bandaging his wounds. The next she had produced a sidearm from somewhere and put 3 rounds through the faceplate of the lead Zealoth, before Vexel had even finished raising his own weapon. She rolled behind cover, still moving with that same economical precision from the archived footage. Her shots were measured, controlled. Each one found a target. There was no wasted movement, no hesitation. The other soldiers responded, training overcoming shock. Thorne and his humans engaged from the left. The Vrel warriors attacked from the right, their mandibles clicking battle cries. Vexel and his Krathens provided covering fire. The fight lasted 40 seconds. When it was over, all 6 Zealoth were dead. Hayes stood up from behind cover, checked her weapon, and holstered it. Then she walked back to the wounded Krathen and continued bandaging his wounds like nothing had happened. We need to establish a defensive perimeter, she said calmly, not looking up from her work. The crash site will attract more hostiles. Thorne, take your people and secure the forward positions. Captain Vexel, we'll need eyes on our 6. And someone please check if the transport's communication array survived. We need extraction, she was giving orders. Confident, clear orders. And everyone, even Lieutenant Thorne, who technically outranked her, moved to obey. Because in that moment they all understood what Vexel had begun to suspect. The clumsy, smiling medic who talked about houseplants was a carefully constructed facade. Underneath was something that knew exactly how to survive in hell and keep others alive while doing it. Hayes finished with the Krathen and moved to the next wounded soldier. Her hands were still steady. Her face was calm. But Vexil noticed one thing. She wasn't smiling anymore. The observation post was 3 kilometers away through hostile territory. The crashed transport offered no shelter. Its hull was breached in multiple places, leaking atmosphere and fuel. Staying meant death, either from exposure or from the enemy forces that would inevitably investigate the crash. Moving meant danger, but at least it offered hope. Lieutenant Thorne crouched beside the remnants of the communication array, his face grim. It's completely fried. We're not calling anyone from here. The observation post should have communication equipment, Hayes said. She had finished treating the wounded and was now helping distribute supplies from the transport's cargo hold. If we can reach it before the Zealoth dig in too deep, we might be able to call for extraction. Vexil studied the tactical display on his wrist unit. The asteroid field around them provided cover, but also limited their sightlines. Sensor readings showed multiple enemy contacts, but the heavy mineral content in the asteroids made precise numbers impossible to determine. We have 5 wounded who cannot walk, he noted. We will need to carry them or construct stretchers. Already on it, Captain, Hayes replied. She had salvaged materials from the transport and was showing 2 of the Vrel how to construct improvised stretchers using supply containers and salvaged cable. Her instructions were clear and precise. This was not the fumbling medic who tripped over her own feet on the station. This was someone who had done this before, probably many times. The transformation was fascinating and deeply unsettling. One of Vexil's warriors, a female named Kessex, approached him quietly. Captain, the small human. She killed 3 enemies before any of us could react. That is not normal medic training. No, Vexil agreed. It is not. Should we be concerned? Vexil watched Hayes as she worked. Still efficient, still focused. She had wiped most of the blood from her face, but some remained in her hairline. She didn't seem to notice or care. She is on our side, he said finally. That is all that matters right now. They moved out in a defensive formation 15 minutes later. The Vrel took point. Their natural ability to sense vibrations through solid surfaces making them excellent scouts. The humans and Krathens formed the main body, with the wounded in the center. Hayes moved among the injured, constantly checking their status, adjusting bandages, administering medication. The asteroid field was a nightmare of jagged rocks and zero-gravity pockets. They had to use magnetic boots and safety lines. Every movement had to be calculated. One mistake could send someone floating off into the void. They had covered maybe half a kilometer when the Vrel scout Chick-Tick signaled a halt. His antennae were vibrating rapidly, a sign of agitation. Movement ahead, Thorne translated the Vrel's clicks. Large group. Maybe 20 contacts. Can we go around? Vexil asked. Negative. They're spread out in a search pattern. They're looking for us. Hayes moved up to where the officers were consulting. She studied the tactical display, her head tilted slightly. We can't fight them. Not with wounded. Even if we win, we'll take casualties we can't afford. Agreed, Thorne said. But we can't outrun them either. They know this terrain better than we do. Hayes was quiet for a moment, her eyes distant. When she spoke, her voice was soft. We need a distraction. Something to draw them away from our path. What kind of distraction? Vexil asked. Hayes looked at him, and for the first time since the crash, she smiled. But it wasn't her usual warm smile. This one was cold, calculating. It was the smile of a predator that had spotted prey. Me, she said simply. Absolutely not, Thorne said immediately. Hayes, you're our only medic, which is why you need me to survive. And I will. But the wounded won't make it if we try to punch through that line. You know that. She was already checking her weapon, adjusting her gear. I lead them away. You move the wounded to the observation post. Once you're clear, I'll lose them in the asteroid field and meet you there. That is suicide, Vexil stated flatly. It's really not. I've done this before. Hayes secured her medical pack to her back, then pulled out her sidearm and checked the charge. I'm small, fast, and good at not being where people expect me to be. I can lead them on a chase, lose them, and be back at the post before you even get the communication equipment working. Hayes. I'm ordering you to stand down, Thorne said, his voice hard. Hayes looked at him for a long moment. Sir, with all due respect, you're not thinking like a combat medic. You're thinking like a soldier. Soldiers hold positions. Medics keep people alive. Right now, those wounded need to get to safety. That's my job. The rest is just details. She moved before Thorn could respond, activating her magnetic boots and running along the surface of an asteroid, intentionally making noise, making herself visible. Contact. Human contact. The enemy voices carried across the void, translated automatically by everyone's communication systems. Hayes fired several shots in the enemy's direction. None of them aimed to kill, just to provoke. Then she was moving, leaping between asteroids with a grace that seemed impossible for someone who couldn't march in formation without tripping. The enemy took the bait. Vexel watched on his tactical display as 20 contacts began pursuing Hayes, moving away from the wounded's path to the observation post. Move, Thorn said quietly. She just bought us time. Don't waste it. They moved as quickly as they could with the wounded. Every step was agony for the injured soldiers, despite Hayes's pain medication. But they made progress. Without the enemy patrols blocking their path, they covered ground steadily. Vexel kept one eye on the tactical display. Hayes was a single blip, moving erratically through the asteroid field with 20 enemy contacts in pursuit. She would appear, fire a few shots, then disappear again. She was leading them on a chase, keeping them focused on her, keeping them away from the main group. She was also running out of asteroids. She's heading for the outer edge of the field, Kessex observed, tracking Hayes's movement. There's no cover there. Just open space. She knows, Thorn said. His voice was tight. Hayes always knows. What happened next would be discussed in military tactical courses for years to come. Hayes reached the edge of the asteroid field and did something that no rational person would do. She deactivated her magnetic boots and pushed off hard, launching herself into open space. No cover, no safety line. Just a tiny human figure floating in the void with 20 enemy soldiers taking aim at her. Except Hayes wasn't floating randomly. She had calculated her trajectory perfectly. She passed through a gap between two asteroids at the exact moment the enemy fired, and their plasma shots hit the asteroids instead, superheating the mineral-rich rock. The asteroids exploded. The shrapnel spread out in a deadly cloud, and Hayes was already on the other side of it, using a small maneuvering thruster from her emergency kit to alter course. The enemy soldiers weren't so lucky. The shrapnel tore through their formation. Their tactical display showed multiple contacts going dark. Hayes had just used 2 asteroids and basic physics to eliminate most of her pursuers. She continued her trajectory, eventually catching a different asteroid and using it to slow her momentum. Then she was moving again, heading back toward the observation post from a completely different direction. How did she? One of the Vrel started to ask. Training, Thorn said simply. Lots and lots of training. They reached the observation post 40 minutes later. The facility was small, designed for a crew of 10, currently occupied by 0. The Zealoth had killed everyone when they overran it. Bodies lay where they had fallen. 3 Krathan observers who had been stationed here. Hayes arrived 20 minutes after that, slightly out of breath but otherwise unharmed. She immediately went to check on the wounded soldiers, not mentioning her impossible escape, not asking for acknowledgement. All right, she said, once she had confirmed all the wounded were stable. Let's get that communication equipment working and call for a ride home. I am really ready for a shower and some terrible cafeteria coffee. She was smiling again, that same gentle, slightly goofy smile, like she hadn't just outsmarted and eliminated 20 enemy soldiers using nothing but physics and audacity. Vexel realized something then. The smile wasn't a mask. It wasn't Hayes pretending to be harmless. It was Hayes trying very hard to be normal, to be the person she wanted to be instead of the weapon she had been trained to become. And that, somehow, made it even more terrifying. The observation post's communication equipment was damaged but functional. Thorn and one of the Vrel worked on it, while Hayes treated the wounded and Vexel organized defensive positions. The facility was built into a large asteroid, with reinforced walls and defensive turrets that were now offline. We're sitting in a metal coffin, Kessex observed, checking sightlines from the main entrance. If the Zealoth decide to push hard, we cannot hold them. We don't need to hold them long, Vexel replied. Just until extraction arrives. And if extraction cannot arrive quickly? Vexel didn't answer because there was no good answer. They all knew their situation was precarious. The Zealoth would regroup. They would realize what had happened. And they would come to finish the job. Hayes worked in the medical bay, which was really just a corner of the main room with some basic equipment. The 5 wounded soldiers lay on improvised beds. She moved between them with practiced efficiency, checking vital signs, replacing bandages, adjusting medication levels. One of the wounded, a young Krathan male named Rixik, watched her with all 4 eyes. "You fought well, medic, very well. I have never seen a human move like that." Hayes didn't look up from her work. "I was a combat medic before I requested transfer to station duty. Saw a lot of action. Why did you transfer?" Rixik asked. "You are clearly skilled. Warriors like you are valuable." Hayes was quiet for a long moment. Her hands continued their work, but something in her posture changed. "Became smaller somehow. Because I was tired," she said softly. "Tired of fighting? Tired of watching people die. I thought station duty would be calmer. Mostly routine medical care, boring physicals, treating minor injuries, normal stuff. But you are back in combat now. Yeah, life's funny that way." Hayes finished with Rixik's bandages and moved to the next patient. "But at least this time I'm choosing it. That makes a difference." Vexel overheard this exchange from his position near the entrance. He was beginning to understand Hayes better. She wasn't hiding from combat. She was trying to recover from it. The smile, the clumsiness, the cheerful chatter about nothing important. These were Hayes rebuilding herself into something that wasn't defined by violence, but she could still access that violence when necessary. She could still become the weapon. She just didn't want to be only that. Thorne's voice crackled over the communication system. "Got it working. Sending distress signal now." There was a pause. "Station 7 is responding. They're scrambling a rescue team, but they need 3 hours to reach us. The Zeloth fleet is between them and our position. 3 hours." Vexel ran tactical calculations in his head. They had ammunition for maybe 1 sustained engagement. The defensive turrets were offline. They had 33 personnel, 5 of whom were seriously wounded, against unknown enemy numbers who knew the terrain and had reinforcements available. The odds were not favorable. "Everyone hear that?" Hayes called out, her voice carrying across the room. 3 hours. "We can do 3 hours. I've sat through longer, boring meetings." It was such an absurd thing to say that several soldiers made sounds that might have been laughter. Hayes grinned at them, then went back to her medical work. The first attack came 90 minutes later. The sensors picked up movement before visual contact. 40 enemy soldiers moving in coordinated groups approaching from multiple directions. They had learned from their previous encounter. They weren't taking chances. "All personnel to defensive positions," Vexel ordered. "Conserve ammunition. Fire only on confirmed targets." The soldiers moved into position. The observation post had been designed with defense in mind. Reinforced firing positions covered all approaches. The walls were thick enough to stop most small arms fire, but they were outnumbered and surrounded. Hayes stayed in the medical bay with the wounded, but Vexil noticed she had positioned herself where she could see the main entrance. Her medical pack was within arm's reach, so was her weapon. The enemy opened fire with plasma weapons, bright streaks of superheated matter that splashed against the observation post's walls. The structure shook but held. Return fire from the defenders was measured, controlled. Each shot counted. "They're probing our defenses," Thorne observed. "Testing our response times, ammunition levels." This isn't their main push. He was right. After 15 minutes of exchange, the enemy pulled back. They had lost maybe 3 soldiers. The defenders had lost none, but had expended ammunition they couldn't spare. "They'll hit us harder next time," Keswick said. That was just reconnaissance in force. The second attack came 40 minutes later. This time, the enemy used the bodies of the dead Krathan observers as shields, advancing behind them. It was a brutal tactic. Designed to make the defenders hesitate, it didn't work. The Krathans especially fired without hesitation. Honor for the dead was important, but survival was more important. The enemy advance stalled under concentrated fire, but they were getting closer, learning the defenders' patterns, adapting. Vexil checked his ammunition counter. Half empty. Around him, other soldiers were in similar situations. They could repel maybe one more serious attack. After that, it would come down to close combat. That's when Hayes spoke up. "Captain Vexil, permission to make a suggestion?" "Granted. The defensive turrets. They're offline, because the power coupling was damaged in the initial attack, but the weapons themselves are functional. I can repair the coupling, but I'd need to go outside to access the maintenance panel. Outside is currently a combat zone, Medic Hayes." Yes, sir, I'm aware. But functional turrets would change the tactical situation significantly. Automated fields of fire, unlimited ammunition from the post's reactor. The enemy would have to withdraw or be cut to pieces. Thorne shook his head. Hayes, you'd be exposed for at least 5 minutes while you worked. They'd target you immediately. Probably. So we'd need to give them something else to target. Hayes was looking at the tactical display, her eyes calculating. If we staged a breakout attempt from the main entrance, drew their attention there, I could use the secondary maintenance hatch on the north side. By the time they realized what I was doing, the turrets would be back online. That's assuming you can repair the coupling in 5 minutes while under fire, Vexil pointed out. Hayes smiled. Captain, I once performed a triple bypass on a Vrel warrior while our ship was actively losing atmosphere. 5 minutes to fix a power coupling? I can do it in 3. Vexil studied her. The smile was confident, not cocky. She believed she could do this. And looking at her record, at what she had already accomplished today, he found himself believing her too. Lieutenant Thorne, organize a diversionary action. Make it look convincing. Kessex, you will provide covering fire for Hayes from position 3. Medic Hayes, you will have your 3 minutes. Use them well. Hayes checked her equipment quickly, then moved to the secondary hatch. She paused before opening it, looking back at the room. If I die doing this, somebody please water my plants. They're in my quarters. The little one by the window needs water twice a week. The others just once. Then she was through the hatch and gone. Thorne led the diversionary attack with precision. The humans and several Krathens burst from the main entrance, weapons firing, creating chaos and confusion. The enemy responded exactly as predicted, focusing their attention on this new threat. Vexil watched Hayes on the external cameras. She moved along the asteroid surface using magnetic boots, staying low, staying fast. Plasma fire tracked across the space where she had been moments before. She didn't even flinch. She reached the maintenance panel and started working. Her hands moved with incredible speed, disconnecting damaged components, rerouting power flows. 2 minutes passed. Enemy soldiers began to notice her. Weapons turned in her direction. Kessex fired from position 3, her plasma rifle putting down 3 enemies who had gotten a clear line on Hayes. But more were coming. Hayes finished whatever she was doing and slapped the panel closed. For a moment, nothing happened. Then the turrets came online. They emerged from hidden positions in the asteroid's surface. Sleek automated weapon systems with targeting computers far more accurate than organic soldiers. They identified enemy contacts and opened fire. The effect was devastating. The enemy formation, already disorganized by Thorne's attack, collapsed under the withering automated fire. Soldiers tried to retreat, but the turrets had overlapping fields of fire. There was nowhere to hide. In 90 seconds, it was over. Hayes made her way back inside through the secondary hatch. She was breathing hard, and there was a new burn across her shoulder where plasma fire had come too close. But she was smiling. Told you I could do it in 3 minutes, she said. Actually took 2 minutes 40 seconds. I'm getting faster. Thorne looked at her. Then at the tactical display showing the carnage outside, then back at her. Hayes, you're absolutely insane. Yeah, probably, Hayes agreed cheerfully. But the turrets work great, don't they? The third attack never came. The Zealoth had lost too many soldiers. They withdrew to regroup, unwilling to commit more forces against an entrenched position with active defensive systems. The extraction team arrived 2 hours and 15 minutes later. By then, Hayes had treated 17 separate injuries, including her own plasma burn, reorganized the medical supplies, and was teaching one of the Vrel how to play a human card game, using improvised cards made from ration packaging. When Commander Zelix himself arrived with the rescue team, he found the observation post secure, all personnel alive, and Medic Hayes losing badly at her own card game, while the Vrel warrior clicked with amusement. She looked up as the commander entered, gave him that same warm smile, and said, "Oh good, you're here. Can we stop somewhere for food on the way back? I'm absolutely starving." The return to Orbital Station 7 should have been triumphant. They had survived impossible odds, held an indefensible position, and suffered 0 fatalities despite being outnumbered and outgunned. Military victories had been built on less. Instead, the journey back was quiet. The wounded rested in medical pods, their injuries being treated by automated systems. The other soldiers sat in the transport's main cabin, each lost in their own thoughts. Combat did that to people. The adrenaline faded. Reality settled in and everyone had to process what had happened in their own way. Hayes sat by herself near the back, her medical pack beside her. She had cleaned the blood from her face and treated her plasma burn, but she looked exhausted. Not physically tired, though that was certainly part of it. It was a deeper exhaustion, the kind that came from holding yourself together through crisis and finally being able to let go. Vexil approached her carefully. "You should rest, Medic Hayes. We will be back at the station in 3 hours." She looked up at him with those two bright eyes. They seemed dimmer now, older somehow. "I'm okay, Captain. Just thinking. About the battle? About how I'm going to explain this to Medical Director Surith. He's going to ask why my uniform is scorched and why I used 3 months' worth of medical supplies in one day." She attempted a smile, but it didn't quite reach her eyes. He's very particular about inventory management. Vexil settled into the seat across from her. His species didn't sit the way humans did, but he had learned to adapt to their furniture. "I suspect Director Surith will be more concerned with the fact that you saved the lives of 33 personnel. Maybe. Or he'll lecture me about proper supply requisition procedures." Hayes leaned back against the wall. He's done it before. There was silence for a moment. Then Vexil asked the question that had been bothering him since the observation post. "Why do you pretend?" Hayes didn't ask what he meant. She was too smart for that. "Because I don't want to be that person anymore. The one who kills efficiently. The one who sees every situation as a tactical problem to solve." She looked down at her hands. They were steady, competent hands. Hands that had saved lives and taken them with equal skill. When I was in active combat duty, I was good at it, too good. I could look at a battlefield and see exactly what needed to be done. Who needed to die so others could live. It was like solving a math equation. That is a valuable skill. "It's a horrible skill," Hayes said quietly, "because you stop seeing people. You start seeing assets, threats, acceptable losses. I didn't like who I was becoming, so I requested transfer to station duty. Routine medical care, boring physicals, no combat. But you cannot escape what you are," Vexil observed. Hayes was quiet for a long time. When she spoke, her voice was barely above a whisper. "No, I can't. When the shooting starts, I become that person again. Efficient, cold, calculating. But afterward, I try really hard to be someone else. Someone who smiles and talks about plants and burns dinner and trips over her own feet. Someone normal. There is nothing wrong with being an effective warrior. There's everything wrong with only being that." Hayes looked at him directly. "Captain, can I ask you something? When you're not in combat, what do you think about?" Vexil considered. "My family, my duties, military history. See, you have other things, other identities. You're a warrior, but you're also a son, a brother, an officer, a person with interests and thoughts beyond combat. When I was in active duty, I forgot how to be anything except a soldier. The war became everything. And I saw what that did to people. Saw them break, burn out, lose themselves completely." She pulled her knees up to her chest, making herself smaller. "I don't want to break, so I force myself to have hobbies. I grow plants because they're living things that need care and patience. I watch silly entertainment programs because they remind me there's more to life than tactics and survival. I talk about nothing important because important conversations were always about who might die next. I'm trying to remember how to be human, not just a weapon that looks human." Vexil began to understand. Hayes wasn't hiding from her capabilities. She was fighting to maintain her humanity alongside them. Every smile, every clumsy moment, every cheerful conversation about cafeteria food was an act of defiance against the part of her that had been shaped by war. "The others on the station," he said slowly. "They think you are strange. I know. And that's okay. Better to be strange and whole than normal and broken." Hayes managed a real smile this time. "Though I really do trip over my own feet sometimes. Can't fake that level of coordination failure." "Why did you tell me this?" Hayes shrugged. "Because you asked. And because after today you would have figured it out anyway. Might as well be honest." She stood up, wincing slightly as her injured shoulder protested. "I should check on the wounded. Make sure the medical pods are doing their job properly." She walked away and Vexil noticed that her gait was uneven, favoring her injured side. No fakery there. Hayes was genuinely hurt and genuinely trying to power through it to do her job. Lieutenant Thorne moved into the seat Hayes had vacated. You talked to her? Yes, what do you think? Vexel watched Hayes as she checked the medical pods, her hands gentle on the controls, her expression focused and caring. I think Medic Hayes is exactly what she appears to be, someone trying very hard to be more than what the military made her. She's the best combat medic I've ever served with, Thorne said quietly. Saved my life once during the transport incident. I was bleeding out, 3 gut wounds, and she dragged me to cover while taking fire from 4 directions, patched me up while calling in artillery strikes, never stopped smiling the whole time. It was the most terrifying thing I've ever experienced. You requested her for this mission. I did, because when things go bad, really bad, there's nobody I'd rather have at my back. But I also hate doing it because every time she has to fight, I see a little piece of that smile die. She comes back to the station, and it takes her a few days to be cheerful Hayes again. Like she has to rebuild herself. Thorne stood up. Commander Zelix wanted someone to write a commendation for Hayes, for her actions today. I'm going to recommend her for the Star of Valor. Second time receiving it is rare. Makes you a legend. She will not want that attention. No, she won't, but she earned it. And part of respecting who she's trying to be means acknowledging what she's capable of. Thorne walked away, leaving Vexel alone with his thoughts. The station appeared on the view screen 2 hours later. Orbital Station 7, spinning slowly in the void, lights glowing from 1,000 windows. Home as much as any military installation could be home. The transport docked smoothly. Medical teams were waiting to transfer the wounded to the station's full medical facilities. Commander Zelix stood at the airlock, his scales gleaming under the artificial lights. Hayes was the last one off the transport. She had insisted on staying until every wounded soldier had been transferred safely. When she finally emerged, her uniform was still scorched, her hair was a mess, and she looked like she might fall asleep standing up. Commander Zelix approached her. Medic Hayes, your actions today were exemplary. I will be filing a formal commendation. Hayes's eyes widened slightly. Sir, that's really not necessary. I was just doing my job. Your job is to provide medical care. You did that. You also provided tactical analysis, executed a solo reconnaissance mission, repaired critical defense systems under fire, and personally engaged and eliminated enemy combatants. That is considerably beyond your job description. Well, when you put it like that, it does sound impressive, Hayes said, attempting humor, but she looked uncomfortable with the praise. Get some rest, medic, you've earned it. Zelix moved past her to debrief the other officers. Hayes stood in the corridor for a moment, just breathing. Then she smiled. That same warm, slightly goofy smile, and headed toward the medical bay. I need to check my plants, she muttered to herself, and then sleep for about 1,000,000 years. Vexil watched her go, this small human who contained multitudes. A warrior who grew flowers, a killer who smiled genuinely, a weapon that desperately wanted to be something more. She was, he decided, the most human person he had ever met. With all the contradictions, complications, and courage that implied. And when the next crisis came, because there would always be another crisis, she would smile and complain about the cafeteria food and then save everyone's lives again. Because that was who Medic Elena Hayes chose to be. 3 days after the mission, rumors about Hayes had spread through the entire station like wildfire through dry vegetation. Every species had their own version of the story, embellished with details that grew more dramatic with each retelling. The Vrel claimed she had killed 40 enemy soldiers single-handedly. The Krathens said she had repaired the defense turrets while being shot at from 6 directions. The humans, who should have known better, started calling her the Smiling Death when they thought she couldn't hear. Hayes herself seemed oblivious to all of it. She showed up to her shifts in the medical bay exactly on time, treated patients with her usual gentle efficiency, and hummed while organizing supplies. The only visible change was a new scar on her shoulder where the plasma burn had been, and a slight hesitation in her step when she thought no one was watching. Vexil observed her during his mandatory post-mission medical examination. She checked his vitals, confirmed his scales were regenerating properly, and asked if he was experiencing any psychological stress from the combat. I am functioning within normal parameters, he replied, which was the Krathen way of saying he was fine. That's good. Combat stress can manifest days or even weeks after an incident. If you start having trouble sleeping or intrusive thoughts, please come see me immediately. She made a note on her datapad. Also, you should avoid heavy lifting with your secondary arms for another week. The tissue is still healing. Understood. And you, Medic Hayes? Are you experiencing any psychological stress? Hayes paused in her note-taking. I'm managing. Thank you for asking, Captain. The entire station is talking about your actions. I know. It's embarrassing. She put down her datapad and met his eyes. I preferred it when people thought I was just the clumsy medic who burned dinner. Now everyone looks at me differently. Perhaps they see you more accurately now, or they see one part of me very clearly and forget about the rest. Hayes gestured at the medical bay around them. This is who I am too. Maybe more than the other thing, but people remember violence more than they remember kindness. Before Vexil could respond, the medical bay doors slid open. A young Vrel female entered, moving hesitantly. She wore civilian clothing, not a military uniform. Excuse me, she clicked, her antennae lowered in a gesture of respect. I am looking for Medic Hayes. I was told she works here. That's me, Hayes said, smiling warmly. How can I help you? The Vrel female moved closer. I am Thicket, sister to Chick-Tick. He was wounded in the recent mission. He told me that you saved his life, and I wanted to thank you personally. Hayes looked genuinely surprised. Oh, Chick-Tick is your brother? He's doing great. The injuries looked worse than they were. He should be back to full duty in a few days. He said you dragged him to cover while under fire. He said you stayed with him even when it would have been safer to leave. Well, that's kind of my job. I don't leave patients behind. Hayes shifted uncomfortably under the gratitude. Really, any medic would have done the same thing. No, Thicket said firmly. Not any medic. My brother has served for 7 years. He has seen many medics. He says you are different. He says you care. Hayes didn't seem to know what to say to that. She looked down at her hands, then back up at Thicket. Your brother is a good soldier and a good person. I'm glad I could help him. Thicket reached into a small bag she carried and pulled out something wrapped in cloth. This is a traditional Vrel gratitude gift. It is grown in our home colony. Please accept it. She unwrapped the cloth to reveal a small plant, unlike anything Vexil had seen before. It had purple leaves arranged in a spiral pattern and tiny bioluminescent flowers that glowed softly. Hayes's entire face lit up. Oh wow, it's beautiful. Is this a Vrel morning star? I've read about these but never seen one in person. You know our plants? Thicket's antennae raised in surprise. I love plants. All kinds of plants. I have 17 in my quarters, though I'm terrible at remembering which ones need what kind of care. Hayes accepted the plant carefully, cradling it like it was precious. Thank you so much. I'll take really good care of it. After Thicket left, Hayes stood in the medical bay holding the plant, staring at it with an expression of pure joy. This was not the efficient warrior who had killed enemy soldiers. This was not the calculating tactician who had solved impossible problems. This was just someone who liked plants and was genuinely happy to receive one as a gift. You are correct, Vexil said quietly. People do remember violence more than kindness, but perhaps that is because we expect violence from soldiers. Kindness is rarer and therefore more notable when it appears. Hayes looked at him, then smiled. The real smile, not the professional one. That's actually really insightful, Captain. Thank you. The rest of the day proceeded normally. Hayes treated a Crothan with a respiratory infection, gave a human ensign medication for a headache, and spent 20 minutes trying to locate a medical instrument she had apparently misplaced during her shift. She eventually found it in her pocket. That evening, Vexil found himself in the station's common area, a large room where off-duty personnel gathered to eat, socialize, and relax. Multiple species mingled together, the war temporarily forgotten in favor of shared meals and conversation. Lieutenant Thorne sat at a table with several other human soldiers. He waved Vexil over. Captain, join us. We're discussing the mission. Vexil settled into a chair designed for multiple species, which meant it was slightly uncomfortable for everyone. What about the mission? Whether Hayes deserves the Star of Valor, one of the humans said, a female sergeant named Martinez. I think she does. She saved all our lives. She definitely does, Thorne agreed. But the question is whether she'll accept it. You know how she is about attention? Did you hear what happened in the medical bay today? Martinez asked. Some Vrel civilian thanked her for saving her brother, and Hayes looked like she wanted to sink through the floor. She cannot handle praise at all. That's because she's genuine, another human said. A young private whose name Vexil didn't know. Most people who act humble are just pretending. Hayes really doesn't think what she did was special. What she did was extraordinary. Keswick said, approaching the table with a tray of food. I have fought for 6 years. I have never seen a human move like that. She fought like a Crathan elder warrior, but faster. Hayes had different training than most combat medics, Thorne said carefully. Before she was a medic, she was something else. Something they don't talk about much. Special operations. The kind of soldiers who get sent on missions that officially never happen. Vexel's attention sharpened. She did not mention this. She wouldn't, it's classified. But I've seen her file, the real one, not the sanitized version everyone else sees. Hayes has been in more combat than most career soldiers. She's seen things that would break most people. The fact that she can still smile, still care about patients, still get excited about plants, that's the real miracle. Martinez leaned forward. Why did she leave special operations? Because she's smart enough to know that kind of life has an expiration date. You either die in combat, or you become someone who can't function outside of combat. Hayes chose a third option. She walked away while she still could. But she still has the skills, Keswick observed. We saw that. Skills don't disappear, Thorne said. She just chooses not to use them unless absolutely necessary. And that choice, that constant effort to be something other than a weapon, that's what makes her remarkable. As if summoned by the conversation, Hayes entered the common area. She had changed out of her medical uniform into casual clothing and held a tray of food from the cafeteria. She looked around for an empty seat. Everyone at Vexel's table waved her over. She smiled, that same warm expression, and made her way across the room. Halfway there, she tripped over absolutely nothing, stumbled, and nearly dropped her tray. She caught herself at the last second, looking embarrassed. I swear the floor moves when I'm not looking, she said, settling into a seat. One of these days, I'm going to walk from my quarters to the medical bay without nearly falling on my face. Today is not that day, Martinez said, grinning. Today is definitely not that day. Hayes looked at her food without enthusiasm. Why do they call this stuff meatloaf when it's clearly neither meat nor loaf-shaped? One of the great mysteries of military cuisine, Thorne said. They ate and talked about nothing important. Hayes told a story about one of her plants trying to eat a protein bar. Martinez complained about the recycling system in her quarters. Keswick explained a Crathan festival that was coming up. It was normal. Boring even. And watching Hayes laugh at a joke, seeing her just be a person having dinner with friends, Vexel understood why she fought so hard to maintain this version of herself. Because this was real too. Maybe more real than the warrior. Because this was who she chose to be when she had a choice. Later, after the meal ended and people dispersed, Vexel walked Hayes back toward the residential section. She carried her new plant carefully, still smiling about it. Captain, can I ask you something? She said as they walked. Of course. Do you think it's possible to be two completely different people? To genuinely be both things, not just pretending to be one or the other? Vexel considered this carefully. The ceremony was scheduled for 1400 hours station time. Commander Zelix had insisted on a formal recognition despite Hayes's protests. The entire station's personnel would attend, and representatives from the Federation military. Council would present the commendations via long-range transmission. Hayes looked like she might be sick. Vexel found her in the medical bay 2 hours before the ceremony, reorganizing the same supply cabinet for the third time. She wasn't wearing her dress uniform yet, still in her regular medical scrubs. Medic Hayes, you will be late if you do not begin preparing. I know. I'm just making sure everything is organized. What if there's an emergency during the ceremony? Someone needs to be able to find the supplies quickly. The supplies have been organized twice. You are stalling. Hayes stopped pretending to arrange medication packs and turned to face him. I really don't want to do this, Captain. Standing in front of everyone, having them stare at me, talking about things I'd rather forget. Can I just accept the commendation in writing? Commander Zelix was quite specific about the ceremony being mandatory. Mandatory fun. My favorite kind. Hayes sat down on one of the medical beds, her shoulders slumped. I joined the medical corps to help people, not to get medals for killing them. Even if they were enemies, even if it was necessary, it doesn't feel like something worth celebrating. Vexel settled into a chair across from her. The commendation is not for killing. It is for saving. 33 lives preserved because of your actions. That is worth celebrating. I could have saved them without the violence. If I'd been smarter, better, faster. You are not responsible for the enemy's choices. They attacked. You defended. You kept your people alive. That is the beginning and end of the moral calculation. Hayes was quiet for a long moment. When she spoke, her voice was barely above a whisper. When I'm in combat mode, I don't feel anything. It's like watching someone else control my body. Efficient, cold, perfect. And afterward, when I'm back to being myself, I have to look at what that other version of me did. The bodies. The decisions. And I feel all of it at once. Every death, every wound I couldn't prevent, every second I wasn't fast enough. That is called having a conscience. Most warriors lose that eventually. The fact that you have retained yours suggests you are succeeding in your goal to remain human. It doesn't feel like success. It feels like I'm two people fighting for control of the same body, and I never know which one is going to win. Vexil leaned forward. Medic Hayes, Elena, may I tell you something about Crathan military philosophy? She looked up, surprised by his use of her first name. Sure. We believe that a warrior's greatest strength is not their skill with weapons, but their ability to choose when to use those weapons. Any creature can be trained to kill. That is simple. But knowing when to kill, when to show mercy, when to heal instead of harm, that requires wisdom. That requires remaining whole. Maintaining all parts of yourself, not just the useful, violent parts. I don't feel very wise. Wisdom rarely feels like wisdom to the person possessing it. It simply feels like doing what must be done even when it is difficult. Vexil stood. You will attend the ceremony. You will accept your commendation. Not because you want recognition, but because the soldiers whose lives you saved need to see you honored. They need to know that what you did mattered, that they matter. Hayes looked at him for a long moment, then nodded slowly. Okay, for them. Not for me. That is acceptable. She stood and started toward the door, then paused. Captain? Thank you for understanding. Thank you for being someone worth understanding. The ceremony was held in the station's main assembly hall, a large space that could accommodate all three species comfortably. The room was packed. Every off-duty personnel had shown up, and even those on shift had arranged to watch via live feed. Vexil stood with his squadron, all of them in dress uniform. Beside him, Kessex muttered, I have never seen this many people attend a commendation ceremony. Usually these events are half empty. Hayes is popular, Vexil observed. Hayes is odd, but yes, also popular. Commander Zellick stood at the front of the room, his scales polished to a high sheen, his formal armor reflecting the overhead lights. Beside him stood Lieutenant Thorne and several other officers. The Federation Council representative appeared on the large display screen, a dignified Corinthian whose fur was graying with age. The ceremony began with military precision. Several soldiers received commendations for various actions during recent operations. Each one was professional, routine, expected. Then Hayes's name was called. She walked to the front of the room, and Vexil noticed several things immediately. Her uniform was perfect, crisp, and properly worn. Her posture was military correct. Her expression was carefully neutral. This was not cheerful, clumsy Hayes. This was the other Hayes, the one who knew how to be a proper soldier, but her hands were shaking slightly. Only someone looking closely would notice. The Federation representative spoke, his words formal and rehearsed.
Medic Elena Hayes, you are hereby awarded the Star of Valor for extraordinary heroism during the Battle of the Talon Nebula.
Your actions directly resulted in the survival of 33 Allied personnel against overwhelming enemy forces. You displayed exceptional courage, tactical brilliance, and unwavering commitment to your fellow soldiers. Commander Zellick pinned the medal to Hayes's uniform. It was a simple thing, really. Just a piece of metal shaped like a star, but it represented recognition from the highest levels of military command. Hayes stood at attention, accepting the medal without expression. Additionally, the representative continued, this marks your second Star of Valor. In the entire history of the Federation military, only 73 individuals have received this honor twice. You join an elite group of warriors whose dedication and skill have shaped the course of galactic history. There was applause from the assembled soldiers. Not polite ceremonial applause, but genuine enthusiastic approval. Soldiers of three species, all of them acknowledging Hayes's actions. Then something unexpected happened. Rixic, the young Crathan Hayes had treated in the observation post, stepped forward. Commander, permission to speak? Zellick looked surprised but nodded. Granted. Rixic addressed the room, his voice carrying despite his youth. I was wounded during the battle. Plasma burns across 60% of my body. I should have died. But Medic Hayes treated my injuries while under enemy fire. She dragged me to cover. She kept me alive when survival seemed impossible. And she did this not just for me, but for 4 others who also should have died. He turned to face Hayes directly. You told me in the medical bay that you were tired of fighting, that you wanted to be normal. But what you did was not normal. It was exceptional. And all of us who survived because of you need you to know that we see both versions of you, the warrior who saved us, and the medic who cared for us afterward. Both are real. Both are you, and both are worthy of respect. Other soldiers began to speak. Chiktik, the Vrel warrior, talked about Hayes staying with him when he was injured, talking to him, keeping him conscious and calm. Martina spoke about Hayes teaching her about the Morning Star plant, showing genuine interest in something completely unrelated to combat. Thorne described Hayes' courage during the medical transport incident 2 years ago. Each story painted a different picture. The efficient warrior, the gentle healer, the clumsy colleague who burned dinner, the tactical genius who saw solutions no one else could find, the person who genuinely cared about plants and people in equal measure. Hayes stood through all of it, her expression becoming less neutral, more vulnerable. Her eyes were bright, and Vexil realized she was fighting back tears. When the testimonials finally ended, Commander Zellick spoke. Medic Hayes, do you have anything you wish to say? For a moment, Vexil thought she would decline. Hayes hated being the center of attention. She would want to escape, to go back to her plants and her quiet medical bay and her normal life. But then she took a breath and spoke. I'm not good at speeches. I'm not good at most military things, honestly. I can't march properly. I burn every meal I try to cook. I once got lost on a station I'd been living on for 2 years. Her voice was soft but clear. But I'm good at keeping people alive. And when I have to fight to do that, I can. I don't like it. I don't want to be defined by it. But I can. She looked at the assembled soldiers, making eye contact with several of them. Every person in this room has chosen to serve, to put themselves in danger to protect others. That's heroic, whether you have a medal or not. Whether anyone knows your name or not. You're all doing the same thing I did, trying to keep people alive in a universe that's constantly trying to kill us. Hayes touched the medal on her chest. I'll accept this honor, not because I think I deserve it more than anyone else, but because refusing it would dishonor what we all do. We fight when we have to. We heal when we can. We try to be better than the war wants us to be. That's what being human means. That's what being a soldier means. She stepped back, signaling she was done speaking. The applause that followed was thunderous. The ceremony ended shortly after. Soldiers dispersed, returning to their duties or their quarters. Hayes was surrounded by well-wishers, each one wanting to congratulate her. She handled it with grace, smiling and thanking everyone, but Vexil could see the exhaustion in her eyes. He waited until the crowd had thinned before approaching. Well spoken, Medic Hayes. She laughed a bit shakily. I have no idea what I said. My brain sort of shut off halfway through. You were honest. That is rarer than eloquence. I need to go water my plants and sleep for about 12 hours, and maybe hide in my quarters for a week. She looked at the medal on her chest. Do you think I can take this off now? It's kind of heavy. Yes, the ceremony is over. You may return to being yourself. Which self? Hayes asked, and there was genuine curiosity in her voice. Whichever one you choose in this moment. That is the gift of peace. You get to decide. Hayes smiled, the real one, warm and genuine. Then I choose the one who really needs to check on her plants. That morning star thicket gave me is tricky. It needs a very specific light cycle. She started to walk away, then paused and looked back. Captain Vexil, thank you for seeing me as a person instead of just a soldier or just a medic, for understanding that someone can be multiple things without being fake. You are welcome, Medic Hayes, though I suspect you are far more than just 2 things. Humans usually are. She grinned and headed toward the residential section, already pulling pins from her formal uniform, already transitioning back to the Hayes who talked about plants and complained about cafeteria food. Kessex appeared beside Vexil, watching Hayes leave. She is very strange even for a human. Yes, but also very effective. Yes, I would serve with her again. Vexil clicked his agreement. As would I, without hesitation. Because Medic Elena Hayes had proven something that the galaxy was still learning about humans. They were capable of extraordinary violence when necessary, but they never lost their capacity for extraordinary kindness. They could be weapons and healers, warriors and gardeners, legends and ordinary people who just wanted to live quiet lives. Hayes was all of these things, and in being so completely, so honestly herself in all her contradictions, she represented the best of what humanity brought to the stars, not just their ability to fight, but their stubborn insistence on remaining human while doing so. The war would continue. There would be more battles, more casualties, more impossible situations that required impossible solutions, and when those moments came, Hayes would once again become the efficient, cold, perfect warrior. But afterward she would return to her plants. She would smile at her patients. She would trip over nothing and burn her dinner and talk about things that didn't matter. She would choose again and again to be more than just a weapon. And that choice, more than any medal or commendation, was what made her truly extraordinary. Vexel returned to his quarters that evening and did something unusual for a Crathan warrior. He accessed the station's botanical database and ordered a small plant for his own quarters. Something simple, easy to care for, that required attention and patience. If Medic Hayes could maintain her humanity through gardening, perhaps there was wisdom in that approach. Perhaps all warriors needed something to care for. Something that reminded them they were more than instruments of violence. The plant arrived the next day. It was green and unremarkable, with basic care instructions attached. 3 days later, when Hayes performed Vexel's routine medical examination, she noticed it sitting on his desk. "Captain, you got a plant." Her entire face lit up with genuine delight. "What kind is it?" "I do not know. The database called it a spider plant. It requires water once per week and indirect light." "Oh, spider plants are great. They're practically indestructible, perfect for beginners." She moved closer to examine it. "You know, they grow baby plants that you can propagate. In a few months you could have several if you wanted." "Perhaps. I thought it would be good to have something living in my quarters. Something that requires care." Hayes looked at him with those two bright eyes, and understanding passed between them. She smiled, warm and knowing. "I think that's wonderful, Captain. If you need any help with it, let me know. I'm pretty good with plants. I may take you up on that offer." "Please do. I love talking about plants. Most people find it boring." "I suspect I will not find it boring." After Hayes left, Vexil sat at his desk and looked at the small green plant. It was just a plant, nothing special, nothing extraordinary. But it was alive, and it depended on him for its survival, and caring for it made him something more than just a soldier. Perhaps that was the real lesson Medic Hayes had taught them all. That being a warrior was important, but being a complete person was more important. That violence might be necessary, but kindness was what made that violence bearable. That you could be a legend on the battlefield and still be the odd person who smiled and cared about plants and tripped over nothing and burned dinner. Because in the end, those small, ordinary human moments were what they were all fighting for. The right to be more than soldiers. The right to have lives beyond war. The right to care about things that didn't matter in any tactical sense but mattered in every human sense. Medic Elena Hayes understood this. And slowly, one plant at a time, she was teaching the rest of them to understand it too. Outside Vexel's window, Orbital Station 7 continued its slow rotation through space. Inside, soldiers from 3 species went about their duties, each one carrying their own contradictions, their own struggles to remain whole in a profession that demanded pieces of them. And in the medical bay, Hayes hummed while organizing supplies, smiled at her patients, and planned where she would put the next plant someone would inevitably give her as thanks for saving their life. Because that was who she was, a warrior who grew gardens. A weapon who chose kindness, a legend who just wanted to be normal. And in a galaxy full of violence and war, that might be the most revolutionary thing of all.